as this achievement may seem small, but for someone who grew up in the Philippines and
She just became the first Filipino in history to reach the second week of Wimbledon, knocking out a defending champion on center court in front of a crowd that came completely undone watching it happen. But almost nobody talking about that win is talking about the man who built the game that made it possible.
She's really developed the game well over the last few years, and I think the influence of
Rafael Nadal didn't just put his name on an academy, he personally picked up a racket and taught her how to serve. And what happened after that lesson is why champions who used to beat her without much trouble now can't find a way to stop her at all. This is the story of what actually happens inside Rafael Nadal's academy, in his own words and the words of the people who trained her there, and how it turned into a weapon that just helped her make history at Wimbledon. Before we get into the specific stories, it's worth understanding exactly what this academy actually is, because it's not just a marketing name slapped on a normal tennis facility. The Rafa Nadal Academy sits in Manacor on the island of Mallorca, in Nadal's own hometown. It's built around his actual training philosophy, one built on relentless work ethic, mental toughness, and a specific kind of humility that Nadal has carried through an entire career of Grand Slam titles without ever coming across as arrogant. When a 13-year-old from the Philippines, a country with essentially no tennis infrastructure, got offered a scholarship there, she wasn't just getting good coaches, she was getting direct exposure to the exact mindset that turned Nadal into one of the greatest players who has ever lived. Let's start with that serve story because it tells you everything about how differently this academy operates compared to normal coaching. According to her longtime coach Joan Bosch, Nadal had noticed EALA struggling with a specific technical issue. He didn't just mention it in passing. He didn't just tell her coaching staff to work on it. He walked onto the court, picked up a racket himself, and started hitting serves to physically demonstrate exactly what he meant. Bosch has said Nadal didn't do this out of obligation. He did it because he genuinely empathized with what she was going through. And when it was over, EALA looked at her coach, stunned, and said she couldn't believe what had just happened. Bosch summed it up simply, that's the luck of being at the Rafael Nadal Academy. Think about what that actually means for a young player's development. Most players on tour learn technique from coaches who study the greats from a distance. Video analysis, biomechanics reports, secondhand knowledge passed down through coaching certifications. EALA learned some of her technique directly from the source, not a video of Nadal's serve. Nadal's actual hands showing her in real time. That's not a small advantage. That's the kind of thing you can't replicate anywhere else in the world, and it's not just Nadal himself. Her coach, Joan Bosch, brings his own serious pedigree to her corner. He previously worked with former world number 1 Carlos Moya and with Spain's Davis Cup team. That means EALA's coaching setup blends two different kinds of elite knowledge, a legendary champion's direct input, and a career coach who has already helped build a world number 1 from the ground up. That combination is rare anywhere in tennis, let alone for a player who came from a country that had never produced a Grand Slam-seeded player before her. Now, here's something that happened much more recently, heading into the 2026 clay season, because this wasn't a one-time thing back when she first joined the academy. It's ongoing. Speaking to Olympics.com ahead of the Madrid Open this year, EALA revealed she'd had an actual practice session with Nadal himself in the off-season, specifically to sharpen her game on clay, the surface he built his entire legend on. She described the intensity of that session in a way that tells you exactly what training with a 22-time Grand Slam champion actually feels like. She said she was locked in, and that it had been a long time since he'd hit like that. She admitted she was exhausted afterward, and made a point of saying that Rafa's intensity never fades, that it's one of the things everyone admires about him, his work ethic. Feeling that firsthand, in her words, was something really special. And when asked what she takes from him specifically as she tries to improve on clay, her answer wasn't vague hero worship. She said clay is grittier, more physical than most other surfaces, and that anything she can take from Rafa she'll take with pride. That's not a fan talking about an idol from a distance. That's a professional describing a direct technical relationship with the greatest clay court player who has ever lived. It's worth mentioning, too, that Nadal isn't the only figure she's spoken about looking up to. At that same Laureus Awards appearance, she talked about growing up watching Manny Pacquiao fight, describing the entire. That kind of honesty tells you something important about who Alex EALA actually is underneath the results and the rankings. She's not performing confidence for the cameras. She's a genuinely humble competitor who still feels the weight of training under a legend, and instead of letting that weight crush her, she's turned it into fuel. So let's talk about what all of this has actually produced, because this is where the title of this video comes from. Champions couldn't stop her. Not one, not two. A growing list of them. She's beaten Jelena Ostapenko, a Grand Slam champion. She's beaten Madison Keys, a Grand Slam champion in the same tournament. She's beaten Iga Swiatek, not once but twice now, taking the head-to-head lead against a player who has worn the title of world number one. She's beaten Elena Rybakina, a Wimbledon champion in her own right. She's beaten Alina Svitolina, a former top-5 player and Olympic medalist. Every single one of those players has, at some point in their career, been ranked above her, more decorated than her, more experienced on the biggest stages than her. What's remarkable is how differently she's had to beat each of them, which tells you her academy training didn't just build one weapon, it built a genuinely complete game. Against big hitters like Ostapenko and Rybakina, she's had to match raw power with precision and timing. Against a grinder like Swiatek, she's had to outthink and outlast through long physical rallies, using patience the same way Nadal built his entire clay court legacy on patience and physical endurance. Against a versatile, tricky player, she's had to problem-solve mid-match rather than rely on a single game plan. That kind of adaptability doesn't happen by accident. It's the product of an academy that trains players to handle every kind of opponent, not just the ones that fit their natural strengths. And every single one of those champions has walked off a court having lost to a player Rafael Nadal personally helped build. That's not a coincidence stacking up match after match. That's a direct line between the serve he demonstrated with his own hands, the clay court sessions he ran with her personally, the advice he gave her at her own graduation, and the growing list of champions who now have to prepare specifically for her, the way you'd prepare for someone genuinely dangerous, not someone you expect to beat easily. There's a quote from her coach, Joan Bosch, that ties this whole story together better than anything else. He said that getting that kind of direct attention from Nadal, someone stepping onto the court to personally show you what to do, that's simply the luck of being at the Rafael Nadal Academy. But luck is the wrong word for what's actually happened here. Plenty of players have trained at that academy. Not all of them have gone on to beat 5 different Grand Slam champions and reach the second week of Wimbledon as the first Filipino in history to do it. The luck was getting access to that kind of coaching. What she's done with it is entirely her own. It's also worth pointing out just how unusual her path through that academy actually was. She arrived there as a 13-year-old from a country with no real tennis pipeline, no domestic tour to develop on, and no precedent for anyone from the Philippines making it at the level she's now reached. She had to learn a new language well enough to comfortably give interviews in it. She had to build an entirely new life on an island thousands of miles from home, all while trying to develop into a professional athlete good enough to compete with players who had every advantage of infrastructure and tradition behind them. Nadal's direct involvement in her development wasn't just a nice bonus story. For a player starting that far behind, it may have been the single biggest equalizer she had. So here's where this leaves us. A legend taught her how to serve with his own hands. He trained alongside her on the surface that made him immortal. He gave her, at her own graduation, the one piece of advice she now considers more valuable than anything else she's ever been told. And somewhere between an academy in Mallorca, a practice court on clay, and a graduation speech about surrounding yourself with good people, Alex EALA turned into a player that Grand Slam champions now have genuine reason to fear. If you want to keep following this story, the next champion she faces, the next surface she conquers, the next piece of this remarkable rise, make sure you're subscribed, because Rafael Nadal built the foundation, but Alex EALA is the one still writing the ending.